Oh, the United Kingdom got itself into a little bit of a war, right? Fighting with Germany. 1940s come around, and what happened there? How many of y'all know? Now, America had already traded a bunch of old destroyers from World War I in exchange for what? Lands and properties abroad. Basically, just small islands in various places. The United Kingdom traded those properties of theirs, or leased some of them, to the United States in exchange for those destroyers. So, what do we got going on? What's the picture? The picture on the front of this is it's called a two-cycle engine, and it runs off of not marine diesel, but marine crude. What does that mean? It means that other than just basically a basic skein cloth to clear out the big debris, it's basically just crude oil. It's pumped out of the ground, put through a filter, and goes straight into the engine. Well, sort of. There's a casing around the engine, and the casing around it has oil that is pumped through it, or in some cases there's a separate heater. It depends on the model of engine. Now, the particular engine that I'm talking about is an opposed piston engine, and they were used in one of the types of ships that we later traded. These were not destroyers, these were merchant ships, and we made a bunch of them for Great Britain. We also refurbished some of them, and I believe the show that I was watching was primarily on the destroyers for probably about 3/4 of it, but the last 15 minutes or so of it, maybe 20 minutes, because I think it was like an hour and 15 minutes long, there was a pretty substantial amount on the marine ships that were given to Great Britain and what was done with them. And a lot of them were complete trash. I mean, they were wartime production. And yes, I get that in 1940, the United States wasn't in war yet, but we had ramped up wartime production. We were at wartime production levels before the war started. Now, of course, we weren't at the later advanced levels, but a lot of the ships that we were refurbishing and, turning over for civilian use, basically, and then those civilians would have to run the risk of driving it across the Atlantic. There was a lot of money to be made in it, a lot of profit to be made in it, and believe it or not, the United States was supplying those things to not just Great Britain, but also to Nazi Germany. Ford himself had people sent to Germany at the request of the Germans. Helped to teach the Great American Production Line method, but the Germans didn't really like that method. They prefer the old cottage industry type of building. Ooh, bad idea. So where do these Liberty ships come in? Well, we haven't gotten to the Liberty ships yet. The ships that were sent across in the very beginning, these were, a lot of them, they had one, maybe two boilers. Some of these ships didn't have boilers. Some of them were run off of basically that crude oil. What they'd do is they'd put it in the heater. It would heat it up a little bit. A little bit of it would be injected in, and then the fact that these two pistons were coming together and compressing it, the heat from compressing it would force that basically diesel to go off, and it's a propellant, not an explosion. It's a propulsion. It's not as violent, you can say, and that pushes the pistons apart. Because they're opposed piston, you can actually get a much higher compression ratio with a much shorter stroke, which means that you can decrease the chances of having stress fractures and longer pieces. There's also a very cool mechanism that they have on the side of the engine that makes it so that you can have longer pistons that are less likely to break and shatter. Now there's three very specific ships. There's like a series of, I don't know, 8 or 9 of them, I think they said, of this very specific ship with this very specific type of engine. And the shipyard that it was built at was not real familiar with what they were doing. Now they had what's called outboard ballast tanks, I believe is what they were calling them. And these outboard ballast tanks are supposed to be where water is pumped in from the sea, and basically that seawater, since it's heavier than the crude, pushes the crude to the top, and that's actually how you fuel your vehicle. However, some genius got it in his head that he was gonna make it so that it goes to the bottom of that tank. It's when you're getting the fuel out of the tanks, you're supposed to get it out of the next tank over. But they hadn't done it right. And so the ballast tanks that were on the sides for, let's say you take a torpedo in one side and it starts to list. That means it starts to turn to one side. It starts to sink to one side. Well, you can equal out the ballast tank so you can even out the vehicle that you're utilizing, whether it be a destroyer or a battleship, or more importantly, an aircraft carrier. You might still have to land some airplanes on the thing. It might be running on fumes coming in after you've been smacked by a torpedo, and there's a couple examples of that from World War II. Now, these ships that I'm talking about, these aren't heavy military ships, though. These are just civilian ships. They're built with a little bit better specifications because they're being built for the British, but they're also being built by the lowest bidder in the quickest amount of time, and they don't necessarily check everything that they should. So 3 of these ships that they built, they put them on the water before running them and testing them out. There's that restricted number again. Unfortunately, they rigged them up so that it was going to take salt water in. Now, this is back before we had a bunch of EPA stuff. And on a lot of those old ships, there's actually 2 ports on each side. And they're oval ports. And they open up to allow seawater in, so that seawater can push your fuel up. It's pretty cool how it works. Now, today, that's illegal. They have to do a different system. But in World War II, this is a very efficient system, and it was used by submarines. It was used by heavy warships and capital ships. The problem is that when you're sucking in fuel from that particular tank and those ports are open, you're not using any of your fuel. What you're doing is you're sucking in salt water, and 3 of those ships sucked in salt water. And because of the compression ratio, when it sprayed the water in there, it was a opposed piston engine. So let's say a piston would normally travel, let's say 11 inches, right? We'll make it a small engine, although these things are huge. They are massive. I mean, we're talking about you have to walk up a ladder to get to the second story so that you can see the top of the engine, and you're still only halfway up. There's still one more deck above that. The deck above it, you're looking down on the engine, but it's the one in the middle is it's a service deck. Now, we had 3 things that happened here. Number 1, we had the incompetency at the shipbuilder's yard. We also had the incompetency of the crew. The crew should have realized that there was a fuel issue, but they realized they were still running despite the fact that there was no fuel being used, so they assumed that there was an issue with the gauges. They should have manually checked. There's a thing on the top of those old type engines that allows you to just open it up and look in there. You can see if it's fuel in there or if it's salt water. And that might not have been as easy as because I just realized, yes, even in that scenario, there's going to be oil that's already in the engine because they fill it up with 5 gallons in the starter thing, and that doesn't last very long. But that would float on top of that water and make it look like it was still oil, I suppose. But you should be able to tell it's contaminated. Anyway, the situation that happened is that these ships went all the way from where they were built all the way to England, and they ran on salt water the whole way. And yes, it wrecked the engines. Of course it would wreck the engines. It's producing a shit ton of salt. And it's got a lot going on there, heating and cooling and heating and cooling. Every cycle it does that. And it might not be much, but it's enough to eat up everything. It's enough to contaminate the oil so that it's now contaminated with a bunch of salt, because it's still got the oil that helps to cycle the engine. Now, I didn't really go into the details of how that particular type of engine worked. It was just one part of, the big long thing about the different merchant ships that we traded and sold to the British and also to the Russians. They did a little segment on that too. And the numbers of ships and all that kind of stuff. And it didn't say, the real specifics of the engine, just that it was an opposed piston. And basically it ran as a water compression engine. You take those 2 pistons, and the more they compress the air, the hotter it gets. Now, because they're opposed piston, let's say they were traveling maybe, we'll say a foot, all right? Let's say they're traveling a foot. If a car engine travels a foot, that piston travels a foot, that's only a certain amount of compression that you're getting compared to atmospheric compression. Now, if you've got 2 of them that are opposing, and each one of them is traveling a foot, then you've got 2 feet worth of compression. That's a lot more heat when it comes together. That's a lot more compression. That's a lot more to go with it. So when they sprayed the water in there instead of the fuel, it made it so that compression was enough to basically turn it into steam almost instantly. And as a result, the engine still worked. Now, if they could filter out the salt, which they can, they could run a vehicle off of salt water. The problem is it takes a long time to do that, and you would have basically 3/4 of your ship would be equipment to turn salt water into fresh water and dump out the salt. But there's other methods of utilizing salt in a similar way, and I'll go into that in a little bit, I suppose. My steam pulse jet engine doesn't have any moving parts, but the way that it works, it could be made to move. It's really cool how aerodynamics work, and also hydrodynamics. Like, you can actually propel a vehicle that's underwater by heating and cooling the water that's inside of it. That's a cool idea, isn't it? Have tubes inside your vehicle with different baffles pointing in different directions, so the water is only going to want to go one direction. That allows you to run your vehicle a lot more silently as well. Doesn't make you move fast, though. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because, there's a lot of flukes in history that happen. The people, sometimes they take a look at that fluke and they have a stroke of genius and come up with something wonderful out of it. And sometimes that fluke goes by for generations and generations before somebody goes, oh, wow, that's a really good idea. I wonder how difficult it would be to convert some of the engines that we have now. Convert them over so that you can pour fresh water into them, clean water into the gas tank, and then course, what are you producing at the other end? It literally runs off of compressed water, which turns into steam, which, yeah, it's not having any sort of explosion, no fire, nothing like that. And with the better alloys that we have today, and with the better casting techniques that we have today, and with the new sleeve technology that we have, we can put in some really, really good sleeves in engines that, well, even if you ran them with that oil, it's still going to take a really long time for them to wear down. One of the things that made me want to bring this up is that I was watching that thing the other day about these engines and about these boats, and I'd seen it probably about 2 years ago is the first time that I saw anything on them, and I think it's the same guy on the same channel. It's not the Drachnifel guy from England, but it's one of those type of channels. And it dawns on me that there's a lot of ideas I have that are not common. When I was talking about making one of those, basically making a blow-up tent on top of a boat, I started talking about that, 6 years ago, 7 years ago? And I got a lot of the stuff to build one of those. The problem is somebody already came out with it. Yes! When something like that happens, I don't go, man, that sucks. Somebody stole my idea. No, you have the technology now and people have access to see it. It's not going to take much for people to put two and two together. And although what was made was not as great and wonderful as what I'd have done with it, the thing is that it's really there. It does exist. People telling me my ideas are stupid and it'll never work, and they do exist. Kind of like my idea for taking some of these plastic bottles, melting them down, a see-through plastic kayak. Now they have see-through plastic kayaks. There's a lot of people who thought that was a bad idea. Saying stuff like, oh man, if you make a screw it. If you make a plastic kayak, then people are going to see the sharks and the fish. Man, I just couldn't do that. Or, why the hell would you want a see-through kayak? Or canoe? I think my original idea was for a see-through canoe. But the whole point was that people eventually came out with it. There's a lot of my ideas like that. There's also ideas that I have that I go through YouTube and I find some of these old military channel things, and I'm like, holy shit, somebody came up with that in 1968. There's an American airplane that had a ejectable cockpit, and it had a similar idea to mine, except that its parachute stayed attached. It wasn't designed for ejecting at Mach speeds, which is what I designed mine for. But it was made so that it was a whole crew pod, like the whole thing ejected away from the vehicle. The important thing when you're at Mach speed is that you're going to want those parachutes to pull out behind you, but you're going to want them to pull out the next parachute and slow you down slowly and incrementally instead of all at once. And you also have to pay attention to the fact that you're going to snap them off. It's going to happen whether you want it to or not, or it's going to have such a tremendous jolt on you that it's going to kill you no matter what. That's why I designed a pressure pillow, basically like an airbag that fits around your body, but it's while you're in flight. See-through, so that when you're flying, you can see through it all. You'd be able to have all your field of vision, but if you have to stop suddenly or make a quick turn, you've got something that's going to prevent your body from jolting into a motion you don't want it going into. And although that is still, as far as I know, my singular idea, the part with the having basically a pillow around the pilot, the ejectable cockpit idea that I had, I've been speaking about that for probably about 6 or 7 years too. Well, as openly as I have been anyway. At first, I wanted to see the feasibility of the idea. But I happened upon a video the other day that showed that it had already been done. Now, when I was looking at the diesel thing and thinking to myself, why don't they just compress water the way that they do with the diesel? Because it takes less to turn water into steam than it does to turn diesel into steam. So why don't we, or to turn diesel into a combustible? So why don't we just do it with water? And I just needed something to reinforce my idea. Now, I get that salt changes the properties of water a lot, and that you might not be able to put pure water in there. It might require something like an electrolyte or something of that nature. But as long as you're not, as long as you're able to find something that's quasi-neutral and is liquid, I mean, it should be feasible pretty easily. Possibly urine. That sounds like a crazy idea to many of y'all, and you might say, oh, well, why would you want to put urine into the environment? Well, you know what? Only a couple of drops of urine in pure water makes it so that you can turn a non-functional battery into a functional battery. It doesn't take much. There's also a lot of other things that can be used and utilized. Anyway, I should probably drive up to the library and try to get my day started and get it going early enough that maybe I can get some of this stuff gathered together and sent to some of the different places it needs to go. I do realize that there's a lot of people who see the parts where I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. That's because that's the only part that people show. People who don't like me get onto my channel and they try to find all the parts they can twist and manipulate into claiming that I'm some off-the-hook crazy person. But how many of my friends ever tried doing that with the truth? None of them even fucking cared. Their words showed that they were pretending to. Their actions showed that it was just pretending. The fact that I followed all of the instructions that we're all taught as kids to follow. Those things that we're told, hey, if you're being victimized, this is what you need to do. I went through all those protocols, and did they work? No. No, they did not. Instead, they got me victimized more. I jumped through the hoops to try to get disability, and instead of what I was told would happen, which is the state would have to pick up the case and put a stop to the abuse. Instead of that happening, they went, oh, well, we're just going to pretend like autism is schizophrenia or stupidity. No, the way you guys treat us is fucking horrible. And then, of course, it's even worse if we're a male, and even worse than that if we're not attractive, and even worse than that if we're alone, and even worse than that if we have no money and you can tell. And then you want to tell us, oh, well, it's our fault for not spending all of our time and all of our money trying to keep up with the Joneses when we're not making enough to eat. Shit. I figured out what the problem is. I left my light on. We'll give it a minute and see if we can try it again. Alright, I'll unplug that. Maybe that'll work. I might sneeze. Yep. I guess I'll give it a few minutes. I got a question for you. I realize Ground FX is because you guys are landscaping, but I was wondering, is your boss a helicopter pilot? Because it's kind of a play on words. The ground effect is kind of a flight thing, so I figured I'd ask.
Yeah, no. Okay. Here's a play on words, though.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad she's inventive. I like the name. What the hell is that beeping? That'll drive you to drinking water. Anyway, a lot of y'all don't know the difference between being overwhelmed and being crazy. And of course, many of y'all make your decisions based on gender, or skin color, or where the fuck did I put my keys? Let's see if we can get this thing started, if I can find my keys. See if I put them in my pocket. No? Here they are. Thank goodness for the Tillamook County Library card. See if it'll start now. Alright. Well, lucky for me, I have the tool for this job. Oh. What a bunch of friggin' Bolshevik. Wait. There it is. Oh my god, yes. Get the fuck out of there we go. That beeping's been going on about 5 minutes and there still ain't no fire truck. I would assume. I don't know what the hell it is. It's pretty loud. Uh, see battery test. But I wanna know for sure. But na 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 na. Bum 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 bum. All right, that guy's got a Newfoundland. It's a type of dog. Very cool. I had to go take a look. All right. Used my external charger to charge up my battery so that I could start it. And now I'm recharging it using the car. So it's kind of a self-service, self-maintenance kind of thing. If it works to get the car started, then the fact the car's running makes it so that I can charge it, which is good. Anyway, now I suppose it's on up to the library. Look, that's getting hot. The whole fucking phone's falling apart, and I gotta try to find the paperwork that's necessary in order to get one of the free phones from Cricket. So I'm gonna go in and ask them what all I need for that, I guess, and then over to the library. The engines that I study, there's a lot of them that I look at and I go, you know, that's just too complicated and there's no way I could do that. And then once I started looking at jet engines and rockets, I went, well, you know, some of those are not bad ideas. Some of those are extremely efficient or very useful. The thing is, with some of them, I had to take a look at their history, and what is often the case with people who do model rockets, rockets are inherently unsafe. Even if it's done professionally under the best of circumstances and best conditions, you are still running the chance of blowing yourself to smithereens. Not the smartest thing you can do if you're a rocket builder. So I know how to make different types of rockets. Can I honestly say that I literally know how? No. You don't know that it works until you've tried it. And even if it's something that does work, if you're not the right person for the job, you might not be able to do it well enough or efficient enough. Like if you're deaf, you might not be the best person for tuning a piano. Oh, there's, I can't. This gentleman here, he's, waving at me to come over there, but I can't go on the Fred Meyers property. There's a lot of technologies that I came up with on my own that it ended up just being stupid because they already have them. Or what I came up with was better than what they originally came up with, but what they originally came up with was definitely very nice and showed a lot of ingenuity and showed that I wasn't the first person to have such an idea. Now, although the ejectable cockpit, they came on that airplane. I'm trying to remember the name of it at the moment. It's not coming to me. Anyway, the ejectable cockpit on it, you know, that's kind of a good motivator for me. At least it's something that they've tried. It was a decent enough idea at the time. figure you ought to be able to do it at top speed, just in case. A lot of the ideas that I have come from other people's screw-ups or mishaps. Some of the ideas that I had for some of my earlier engines came from the idea of using hydrogen peroxide. Because I found out that both the Russians and the British ended up blowing up their own submarines by using hydrogen peroxide to feed their torpedoes instead of entirely compressed air. Now those torpedoes, the ones from World War II, compressed air containers on them was about 3,000 psi. That's a lot. And the modern torpedo design is from a guy by the name of Whitehead. Alright, there's the cricket store. I was told it's closing, but we'll find out in just a second. Park over here by the Tillamook liquor store, I guess. Anyway, the engine that I designed, they have them. The engine I designed based off of hydrogen peroxide. The problem is the production of hydrogen peroxide. Getting it to 80% or higher concentration. Anyway, I'm going to end this video because I need my phone not to overheat and blow up.